There we go. Hello, everyone. It is Christy. It is Sunday. It is Weekend Winters. I don't even know what day it is anymore. Actually, to be honest, it is a little bit like if I'm not, the show structure helps me organize my days. I'm not going to lie, that's the case. So hello everyone, it is Sunday and Weekend Winters. And in this episode, we're going to talk about two things in the main, I thought, which was to first go over 101 and how to read polls again. I know that a lot of people could have been watching my channel for a while. Can you guys hear me? Just make sure. Sorry, the OBS thing. Yeah, my mic seems okay. I'm going to turn it up a little bit. I'm going to turn myself up tiny bit. Just adjust your volume accordingly. Yeah, so if you've watched my channel before, you might have seen this. But then again, it's not a bad thing to do a refresher thing on from time to time, especially when polls are going to become increasingly important. Polling is always informative. But as we get, for Americans especially, as we get closer to the November elections, I'm trying to sort myself out here. Not doing a good job. It's worth kind of remembering how to evaluate polls. So I thought we'd do that. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about today is there were a few more stories on the Tara Reid issue that came out in the last 24 hours. There was a PBS account, there was a Politico story, and there was another one, I'm going to say in The Spectator, but that might not be right. Anyway, there are some real issues that are coming out about her background and also people who refute her story, because you're always hearing about the corroborating witnesses and people who will back up her story, but there isn't oftentimes equal time given to how many people have said, no, I have no memory of that. That doesn't sound right to me. I have no recollection of that conversation, that ever happening. And we're going to look at it not so much from a Tara Reid point of view. I think a lot of people have done that. But there is, I think, some valid questions to be asked about the people who started the story off, the people who lacked the journalistic standards and integrity that had led other more professional journalistic outlets to not run with her story. So I thought we would have a little discussion about that. And that was kind of what I had for this hour, because, it's, I'm not a medical expert. I can't spend a lot of time talking about COVID, and therefore talking about things that I can talk to you guys about, and also to say hi to people in the chat. So let's have a look. Actually, you guys are technically below me, but from my point of view here, I'll move it over where I can see you guys. So let's see. Hi, Striped Mongoose. Good morning. Good evening, Lucky Wanderer and DNF Fan 292. Hello. Welcome to the show. Shoo. Yeah, let's start off with a little 101 on polling and reading polling results, crosstabs, as they're sometimes called, depending on how they're presented. So, I guess the first thing, when we're going to talk about polling, and also, let me get a little bit of coffee in here. Whenever you look at a poll, you are looking at a snapshot in time. All right, so I think maybe it might help to start off with some general principles about how sampling and polling works, some things that you can remember when you look at data as just a general frame of reference. So one of the things that social scientists, an assumption that we operate under, is that within any population, there is a true value. There is an actually empirical true value that, in theory, could be found. So let's say let's apply this to the Biden-Trump general election matchup. At any given point in the United States, and for all the voters who live outside the United States but are eligible to vote, like me, you could, if you could do a census of everybody who was going to be voting in November, you would actually be able to get something like a true value, true results. So you would have some people who are going to say, yeah, I'm going to vote for Trump, and other people who say I'm going to vote for Biden, and other people who are undecided, or they're leaning one way or the other, whatever, right? But there is a number out there that we could assign to those things. If it was possible to actually talk to every single person, we could find that number. Now, one of the challenges for political scientists is that that number is not a fixed target, right? Like while you are taking answers, people could be taking in information that would change their mind, that would change that true value. So on the one hand, empirically, sort of on an ontological and epistemological basis. So in terms of like realism or non-realism, like we think that there's actually like a value out there that can be found. It's not it's not just like a social construct. It's something that we can go out and measure and would have a definitive answer. On the other hand, that definitive answer is constantly changing. So when we go to sample a population, what we are trying to capture is what we think is a range around that true estimate. So you guys know from doing cooking that if you put in like all the spaghetti, like you're gonna put your pasta in boiling water, and you throw it all in, at any given time, you can reach in and take out a few, let's say spaghetti, not pasta, like spaghetti pasta. You can take out a strand of spaghetti and either bite it or throw it against the wall, and its doneness, which I just find is a very awkward word, you will take that as representative of all of the spaghetti that is in the bowl or in the pot. And so if it is about halfway done, it's a little too al dente still for your tastes, that means you need to let it boil longer. Right? So now it is possible that you got one strand of spaghetti that just was hanging around the coldest parts of the pot, and actually it doesn't do a good job of representing the overall doneness of the spaghetti because it was what we call an outlier, right? So again, you can kind of see this this working with polling and trying to estimate the true value in a population, or the point estimate of a population, in that you take a sample, you assume that it's pretty much like the other things around it, but there's also a possibility that maybe it won't be. Maybe it'll be really quite different for some particular reason. And in which case, you would then maybe overcook the pasta because you had a bad sample, right? We can, again, transfer these principles over to talking with people too. Some polls do a good job of sampling, or sometimes, and some polls do a bad job of sampling. So that can affect, like if you have a strainer that only takes, if you only take from the top of the top of the spaghetti thing and never from the bottom, for instance, like you have a bias in your spaghetti tester, then that's going to maybe sometimes skew your results. So with this understanding that there is a point value in the population that could be found in theory if we talk to everybody, but knowing our limitations, what do we want as social scientists or political scientists when it comes to taking a survey? And what we want is, we know already going into it that there's going to be a margin of error. And that's because unless we do a census, we will always have a range around that true value. So let's say in a population, the true number of people who are going to vote for Donald Trump is 40%. And when we do our sample, when we do our survey and we take people from our sample, based on the number of respondents, we know that we're going to have a plus, let's say a +3 and a -3 around whatever value we get. And let's say that our sample value was, did I say 40? Okay, our sample value is 42%. Right, so the true value in the population is 40%. Our sample has a basically a point. I'll explain how the point thing works in a second, but it says it's 42% is the real number. But our margin of error allows us to say, well, it could be as low as 39%, and it could be as high as 45%, but 42% is like right in the middle of that range that we got from our sample, and so we're going to guess 42%. Now, in our magical minds, we know it's 40%. Like the true value in the population is 40%. Our survey says 42%. So is our survey bad? No! Our survey managed to, within its margin of error, capture the true value. So that is how you should always read polling results. Never just compare the point estimates against two people, because what you're really looking at is a range in which you have confidence. So let's have a look at some actual polling results. Yeah, let's say Biden, Trump, since that's what we're going to be talking about. Trump. I hate typing in public. And Binden. Wow, I've got all kinds of typos today. I think it's, yeah. All right. 538. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Well, New York Times, I can't, let's see. Latest polls, 538. That's fine. I don't want to go to New York Times because I don't want to burn up one of my own, they only give you so many per month, and I tend to hoard them and not really look at New York Times unless I absolutely have to, and then usually by the time that the month rolls around, I've never used it. Anyway. All right. So we're going to look at, here's some latest polls. Presidential approval. Okay, yeah, that's fine. This is a fine way to look at it. So let's look at some of the details that we want to look at when we come to evaluate a poll. First is, who's the pollster? Generally, here, I know that there's a tendency in the media to list someone as a Democratic pollster or a Republican pollster. People also have, for some reason, a prejudice against certain media outlets. But let's step back from the conspiracy theories for a second here and realize that every polling outfit, every polling firm, its reputation depends on how accurate its polls are. Right? Polling is about predicting the future, and predicting the future, super hard. If predicting the future was easy, we wouldn't have like a stock market, because people wouldn't be taking risks on what was going to happen in the future. They would know it. And so they would just base all of their information on their knowledge of what's going to happen in the future. But that's not how it works. So when it comes to polling agencies, unless there's some sort of, I've got issues with Rasmussen, right? But generally, outfits like YouGov, Ipsos Mori, the Comres, the Wall Street Journal ones that they do in partnership with other polling firms or NBC, these companies want to get good results. They want to be accurate. And if you've ever attended a polling conference, which you haven't, but I have, there's a lot of inter-agents or inter-industry competitiveness over who's got the best, the lowest margin of error on their guesses, who got close to the actual result. And there is pride with that, there is like smack talking going on between reps of different polling firms saying, yeah, but you were 4 points off in your last election prediction. Like, oh, actually it was only 3.7%, which was inside the, whatever. It's like, so these companies don't have an incentive to misrepresent their results. If you're 5 or 6 points out on the election result, people won't hire you again, right? So there is a built-in incentive for these polling agencies to get things right. So unless I have seen evidence in that, like a polling agency or firm has a really bad track record, Rasmussen, I generally look at their stuff and assume that they're a professional polling outfit. So, all right. So Global Strategy Group, GBO, Navigator Research, I looked at presidential approval. And let's see. If I click on this, what is it going to do? Oh, it's going to give me the poll of polls. Okay, we'll talk about the poll of polls later. So here, oh, this is actually pretty good. Yeah, I wish the background wasn't white. It's so hard to read. And I want to make the font bigger so we can look at these numbers. And it's not really helping me out here. All right. I'm going to have to skinny you guys down on the chat a little bit. But you guys seem to be listening more than talking, so that's good. So, hello everyone, by the way. Good morning, my pretties. It's nice to have you here. Couldn't there be incentive to misrepresent as part of a partisan agency? Not these ones. Again, if you're a partisan agency and you're telling your client they're going to win because you're giving them false results and then they lose. I don't see how that helps you. Telling people what they want to hear, eventually, like chickens come home to roost. And if the campaign is making campaign decisions, targeting, marketing, GOTV decisions based on terrible data, they are going to lose. So, I think you really have to think about polling as almost like scouts in an army, or in some sort of like, military capacity of reconnaissance. That is what a polling agency is doing for a campaign. And I want I know there's a whole campaigns are kind of like wars or elections, and there's some, they're bloodless, but it's about territory, it's about troop numbers, it's about mobilization, it's about logistics, it's about, getting your people to turn out and dominate in terms of numbers. So there's a lot of either sports or military comparisons that could be made. And in that case, the polling agencies, they're your scouts. They reconnoiter the field. They tell you where your enemy has strengths and where you have strengths, and where your enemy's weaknesses are and where your weaknesses are. So again, I don't really see. So the Lucky Wonder says, if you decide to report that a candidate had it by a larger enough margin in order to create a sense of complacency in his supporters. Generally, I think people who are going to vote, who are interested in voting, they do already have some sense of where the lay of the land is. So if you are, I'm going to go off the whole polling thing to answer this question from the Lucky Wanderer. And good morning, Flint. Morning, Wintarians. All right. So the idea that, what was it again? A candidate had it by a larger margin in order to create a sense of complacency in his supporters. All right. So so if you just work out the rationale of that, for instance, let's say you are in a campaign and you are up by 5 points in the campaign. Well, if your margin of error is a total of 6 points plus 3 minus 3, that actually means if you're up by 5 points, you could be losing. So having worked on campaigns, I will tell you, campaign managers and candidates will always tell you to run like you're 3 points behind. Always run, unless you've got just like your candidate, that your opposition is a sacrificial lamb. If you're in a safe Democratic seat and you're an incumbent with 3 terms of experience behind her, and she's already banked like $1 million or whatever for her media, and she's running against, a local gadfly who has no organization, has no business connections or fundraising connection, is just sort of doing it to give her some symbolic opposition. You wouldn't even waste your money on a polling firm at that point. People spend money on polling firms when things are close, or when they think it's going to be close. Because as a campaign, again, think about it like a military outing, right? You aren't going to waste your resources on things that are unnecessary. And so if you are dominant in a land, you don't really necessarily have to scout out your enemy because you can defeat them. For, let's say, a safety seat, they're not going to spend a lot of polling money against a sacrificial lamb with no name recognition, who's not going on TV and, barely even showing up for the 4th of July parade with, more than 3 or 4 participants. They're just not going to take them that seriously. And I've worked for people who've had those kinds of candidates up against them. I worked for a state senator who basically only ever had really sacrificial lambs run against him as Republicans. And, you do a little bit of fundraising and you do maybe a little bit of media, but honestly, you kind of, once you're pretty sure your seat is safe, you let that money go to other Democrats, because as a politician, you want to be in the majority. So there's a personal interest to cover your butt in your seat, but then there's a collective self-interest in getting your party to be in political power. And if you're sucking up resources, then more marginal candidates who could flip the power dynamics are maybe not getting them. So in that way, in terms of telling the sense of security. So voters will, one of the things that really surprised me when I did the qualitative election study of Britain was the extent to which, when you ask somebody how they're going to vote, almost in more than half of the cases that we observed in this particular article that we wrote, they all start with, well, I live in a safe Tory seat, or I live in a Lib Dem Labor marginal seat, or, I live in a seat that used to be Liberal Democrat but has trended conservative. People understand the political constraints upon their choices first. And so if they know they live in a safe Republican seat, there can be a depressed motivation to turn out if you're a Republican because you feel safe. But that also moves over to the Democrats to say, and I know I'm using a British example, but the logic transfers. If you're in a safe Republican seat, it doesn't kind of matter what Democrat you vote for, you feel like you're going to lose. And people in more competitive seats feel like they have more power when a race is close. So there's a problem with assuming that good polling or a comfortable lead will have an effect on voters because, one, we don't know what polling is done internally and externally. So let's say it's an external poll that's published in the media, it's published in the local paper. What are the chances that any one voter is going to read that newspaper, and then when they read that newspaper that they're going to see that article, and then when they see that article, you see where I'm going here, they're going to read into that poll, and then when they read into that poll, they're going to get a sense of security. So campaigns always run like a good campaign, successful campaigns always run like they're 3 points behind. 3 points behind means you can make it if you work hard. 1 point behind is not enough. 5 points behind feels too much, but 3 points behind is just about right. Okay. So I see you're expanding on your point. So I just wanted to make that, though, because it's not an uncommon thing. Like people think that polling is used for somehow in ways that I find a little bit strange, having worked with polls. So Lucky Wonder using, I think I'm poorly explaining my question. I might DM it to you. Okay, over Twitter in the happy hour. 200 characters enough. Fair enough. I will check for you in the... Oh, okay. Sorry, I got a message from a friend inviting me over to his place. So yeah, I'll have a look at it there. So getting back to this, let's say, oh wow, that got super big. How do I make it small again? I'm having a hard time catching the edge of this. Why am I having the hard time? Oh, you're annoying. Oh, you are so annoying, stupid Google. There we go. Okay, now finally I caught an edge where I can move it around. Okay, we were talking about polling and we were talking about doing it for approval ratings, right? So assumption here, just to restate, is that there is a true value in the population of approval, disapproval, and don't knows or have no opinions on Donald Trump, and we are getting a sample. So here you can see this, do they have much information? Do they give? Okay. You can see here it's just 41% approve, 57% disapprove. Okay, let's see. Okay, and this is also important. Who is the sample population? This is actually really good point to make. How to start this. Okay. So let me go through and just show you a little bit about what I mean about the range. So here we've got registered voters. Trump has got 41% approval, 57% disapproval. Down here in YouGov, we've got registered voters again. We've got 44% to 54% approval to disapproval. Now in this YouGov poll, we have all adults. So whether or not they're a registered voter or not, doesn't matter. That too is 44% to a 50% disapproval. Rasmussen, I'm going to skip because I don't trust Rasmussen. Maybe they've improved their methodology, but I just stay away from them. 1,001 registered voters, 42% to 56% disapproval. Gallup, 1,028 for all adults, 49% approval, 48% disapproval. So let's just come back here a little bit and look at this. Registered voters on these three, 41, 44, and 42. The disapproval rate goes from 57 to 54 to 56. So as you can see, they're not hitting the same point estimate, the point estimate. They're not hitting the same number, 44, 44, 44, 44 again. But if you think of a range of, let's say, 3 to 5%, depending on the sample size, actually probably smaller because these sample sizes are a bit bigger. The bigger the sample size, generally the smaller the margin of error. However, at some point, you can't eliminate a certain amount of error. Like once you get to that 1.5 or 1% error, you're not really getting a good value for money by adding another 15,000 people. So polling firms tend to run anywhere from about, 250 to maybe, it depends on how many subgroups they want, but let's say, 1,500 would be pretty typical. If they specifically wanted to know how many, about groups, like they want to know about Hispanics or Latinx voters and white voters and black voters and Asian voters and Muslim voters, you need 250 observations for each of those. So when you have the bigger sample sizes, it's usually because they want to make sure they have enough to look deeper than just general summary statistics. They want to look into the subgroups. So 41% seems about the low. What's the high here? 44%, 42 bops in there right in the middle. So you can kind of see that we don't really necessarily know the actual number. Each of these results has some amount of error in them, but we're seeing a consistent pattern. We're seeing that consistent, sort of low 40s range come up over and over and over again. So we know we can have some kind of, the fact that these polls for the same types of voters are coming up with similar results, and they kind of like, they lend each other a little bit of credibility. The other thing too that you will want to watch and is the poll, the average of all of the polls. So we had here, how did I get to where I got to before? How did I get to the poll of polls? I forget now. I think I just clicked on this, presidential approval. Yep. Okay. How unpopular is Donald Trump, and how popular is a good question. So as we said, all of these individual polls have their own margins of error. Because we assume that there's some sort of noise, people are changing their minds, for instance. People could go from no opinion to having an opinion, or having an opinion to no opinion. So again, we're trying to hit a moving target. The idea of a poll of polls is that the magic of the aggregate. Somehow, if you kind of dump all of the polling results together, with some weighting on types and sizes of samples and things, that somehow the errors from various polls are going to cancel each other out and you get a truer result. I don't know. Basically, it's kind of pooling your results and averaging out the errors. And the idea here is that what you don't get is the variation. So if you have a sample, like with our spaghetti example, if you had a bad sample and you pulled out some group of people and 67% of them had approval ratings, like approved of Donald Trump, and only 30-some% didn't, well, that might be true for your sample because you picked something that doesn't look like the general population, but that result would still be in here. And the idea is that those kinds of wacky samples, their effects will be minimized by samples that better reflect the actual population. So it's kind of the magic of the aggregate. But a meta-analysis of polls, they actually they're dumping all the numbers together. And so, there's problems here with the poll of polls. Let me just be honest here. This isn't a better poll. How should I say this? Even these results, even a poll of polls has problems. The poll problems have to do with you're dumping together responses that might not have had the same wording questions or the response options, right? And so on the plus side, you're getting in a poll of polls a lot of little polls, smaller polls, and their averages, their numbers, right? And so you're getting basically kind of like a bigger sample size. But on the other hand, you're also picking up some level of uncertainty because when you don't compare exact wordings to exact wordings from a scientific point of view, you can't make a direct comparison. So how do I say this? It's like the poll of polls has less of a chance of sampling error, but might have less precision because of the way that the questions were worded. So it's more like a mood rather than a precise dart on an opinion. Did that help at all? Right? So you're increasing your sample size reduces the chance for error in your sampling, but banging or bunging in all of the questions that just have some sort of approval or disapproval can maybe cover up some of the wording biases or prompts or effects. But as you can see, people do generally like the polls of polls because of that reduction in sampling error. And the other thing that it does allow you to do is then do a nice time series analysis. If you're willing to sacrifice precise wording comparisons, which is technically the standard. It's actually the way it's meant to be done. But if you're like, okay, I'm going to give up some precision in wording and response option comparability for a more of a mood of I like, I don't like, and you understand that this isn't, in that way, you're kind of getting sentiment, right? Then the nice thing about tracking just sentiment over time is that you can watch for trends. So the other thing, before I'm going to go into the polling a little bit more, but any individual poll is like a snapshot. It's like a Polaroid, let's say, or a picture. And that snapshot can tell you about that moment in time. You can look at it and you can see, just think about it like a picture of yourself from 15 years ago. We're going to take a snapshot of you from 15 years ago. And everything around you is, like chronologically correct. It's a reflection of where you were at that time. But of course, you're a moving target as well. You're moving through time. So let's say we take a snapshot of you every 6 months for 15 years, you could almost go, and make that almost like a movie. You're getting a view of, maybe you're getting taller over time, or you're getting wider, or you're getting thinner, or, like something else changes about you over time. But you're seeing change over time and trends. Same thing with one of these, dumping all of the responses in a poll of polls. You can start to see trends inside the data, and you can also see when trends change. So let's have a deeper look here at the poll of polls before we go back to just a single poll, and see if I can show you a little bit about what I'm talking about. So what we have here is you can kind of track, let's say, the rally around the flag effect. Let's take a look at a very well-known political science polling effect called rally around the flag. You might have heard about it in the media because leaders' popularities were going up in the middle of a pandemic. It's the simple logic that when something bad happens in a nation, there is an emotional tendency for the nation to come together and kind of grieve together, mourn together, feel united maybe against if it's an attack from an enemy. They might feel a closeness or more of a kinship with other citizens or people in their in-group. And one way they express that is by showing it just being generally supportive of whatever political leader is in office at the time. We saw that with George W. Bush. He was not getting great approval ratings. And then 9/11 happened. And there was an instantaneous rally around the flag. It's insane. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this. But George W. Bush polling approval. George W. Bush, here we go. All right, you should be able to get the entirety of his term. Right, yes. This is what I'm talking about. This is the best example of a rally around the flag effect. Get in there. Yeah, get up close. All right, so here he is. He wins a contentious election. He's not George W. Bush the first time. I think that was when it was him versus Gore, right? And it was very contentious. But presidents also have a honeymoon period. And in that honeymoon period, people they used to. I don't really think that exists anymore post-Obama because of white supremacist jerks. But before, when white guys were still being nice to white guys, because that's where the power lays. But yeah, generally the president will get a bit of a honeymoon period. And as you can see, that pretty much wore off. George W. Bush, in the first few months of his presidency, was hovering in the just over 50%, let's say 50, 60, 57%. And then 9/11 happened. And nothing about his policies changed. Nothing about his cabinet changed. The only thing that changed was that Americans felt attacked, and they looked to their commander-in-chief as a symbol of where to go and what to do. And you can see here, this 90% is where he got his high. So there was probably some polling data taken before the full effect of the rally around the flag could be captured in the data. Sometimes they'll take data over a couple days. They'll take 3 days of polling samples and they'll sort of aggregate them together. So if you had 2 days or 1 day before 9/11 and then 2 days of data collection after 9/11, that could explain why it went, from 86% to 90%. The other thing you should know about with the rally around the flag effect is there's a concept in time series analysis. So what we're doing here is we're analyzing a time series. We're not doing it on a regression level, but in a time series analysis, one thing you'll want to look for is what's called like a decay rate. So after there's this rally around the flag effect, again, the rally around the flag effect happens because people change their minds. And then you see the spike in approval. And then over time, that effect will wear off. The shine will go away. The president will do something to annoy people or make them disappointed, and they'll take their approval away. Right? So one of the things that we estimate is like the decay rate or the effect of, that reduction over time. And as you can see, he was able to ride that wave of approval for basically almost a year, George W. You see, back here by 2003, he was back to exactly where he was when he started his presidency. And that entire 30-point jump plus was really all in response to the attacks. Now, the 71% here, I don't know the exact timing, but I'm assuming this is when the U.S. invaded Iraq. And that would explain why you'd see another rally around the flag effect. Because of mindless patriotism. But then we have the various problems of the Bush administration, and by the, he's here down by 25% here near the end of his second term. So that is something to kind of keep in mind when you're looking at things like approval ratings and polls and stuff. Oh, okay. This rally around the flag effect. So we see here we've got pre-corona Trump. This is actually right around the time of the impeachment trial. Initially in the impeachment trial, he lost some support. You see his disapproval going up and his approval going down a bit. And then as it gets toward, I guess, the end of the year, he starts to get a slight rally. Yep, here in December. And when he's actually tried and convicted, by the time his conviction comes through, he's getting at his nadir of approval. And then there's and this too, when we're getting into the coronavirus pandemic, and we're getting out of impeachment where he's at his highest disapproval, his lowest approval, and then we start to see some drops throughout the month of February as we're getting closer and closer and closer to what we know would be the pandemic and the lockdown. So, oh no, we're in the completely wrong area. Well, look at that. I could just tell a story about data and be in the wrong year. Okay, sorry. I thought we were closer to 2002. I was a little bit confused, but here we go. All right, let's try again, Christy, with the correct timeline. Let's start in October of this year. All right. So, because my recollection was that he had a little rally. I was a little bit confused by the poll of polls, but now I know why I was confused. I was in the wrong year. Okay, so going back to November, his disapproval, as I said, this is why I was a little bit confused. His disapproval actually kind of went down as he got closer to the actual conviction. So he had a big high point during the hearings when everything else, his disapproval had a high point during the autumn and the hearings and everything. But by the time we get into the conviction here, like around in January, his approval actually kind of went up a little bit. But then we see a downward trend. And then as coronavirus hits, you get a slight rally around the flag effect. So, all right, I was kind of wondering, messed up the dates, but I was remembering the date. I was like, this doesn't seem right, but okay, I'm looking at data, I can't. And so there is, even for Trump, his disapproval ratings dropped in the middle of a pandemic because there was a sort of like rally around the flag effect. But his was smaller than most international leaders. And then it's once kind of, he had a couple, let's say about a week and a half or so. And then as the death rate started to mount, it started to climb again. So just a little bit on the poll of polls, and also how trends are what you want to look for, not just snapshots. You want to look at the bigger picture and the bigger mood. And if we look just generally at where Trump is in terms of his approval ratings, you can see that although he had some, depends on how much you want to consider a big difference. At his height, looks like he had like 57 disapproval. Right now, he's around 52, 53. So where else did he peak? Yeah, even here in January of last year, 55% disapproval. You never want to be an incumbent who is starting your re-election bid with under 50% approval in the country. I don't think that any president, any incumbent has ever won with starting out their re-election with under 50%. But, the thing about Trump is that he just seems to defy political gravity. And many, many times, not always, but sometimes. So getting back to the polls themselves and individual polls, let's talk a little bit about who gets sampled. And this is also important. So one is we want to look at the margin of error, right? How much is it? Is it 3.5% plus or minus? Is it a 5% plus or minus? If it's a 5% plus or minus because the sample is very small, and we can talk a little bit about things that affect the sampling margin of error maybe in another time. But if it's a 10% range, and you look at the same poll, the same firm, the same wording, month after month, and there's a plus or minus 5%, and in one poll it's up 2 points, and the next poll it's down 2 points, that's no change. There is no change there whatsoever. So one thing I would always advise you is look to see whether or not the results for the point estimates are when you're comparing like a Trump to a Biden. It doesn't work here. It doesn't work here because we're just looking at approval, disapproval. So there's like no way to compare it. But when we look at Trump versus Biden, for instance, if there's 7 points of difference between them and the margin of error is plus or minus 3%, that means that 7% is 1 point outside of the margin of error. So that's like a real difference. It also means that probably in most polls, you won't know whether or not there's a real difference. Most polls, are in the margin of error. And so saying a 1 point shift or a 2 point shift from last week or last month, it's just noise. It's just background noise. And it's very difficult to get outside of the margin of error. You have to have a real lead. You need a real lead in the polls in order to have a real lead outside of the margin of error. And it could be the case that there is, let's say Joe Biden is always up by 2 points. Like in the population, his true value is 2 points. If all of the polling is within a 3% margin of error, we can't be sure of that. You can't count on, I would never count on a 2 point advantage. It would seem to lend itself, if it's consistent across polls, to a conclusion that Joe Biden has a slight advantage in that situation. But I would never say, well, 5 polls said Joe Biden was up by 2 points, so he's up by 2 points. No, because it's in the margin of error. So really, the margin of error, first thing and foremost, is what you should look at when you're interpreting a poll, because if you don't take into that account, that fuzzy, that range of accuracy, then you're going to expect more from a poll in its precision than you reasonably should. There was one other thing I wanted to say. Yes. What does the margin of error actually mean? Again, let's say, that we've got a poll where we have a sort of you can go through and do the math, the standard deviation, everything else, but you get, your range is 40% to 50%. With a 5% margin of error, and so your point estimate's going to land on 45%, plus or minus 5% on either side, right? What does that actually mean? What does that 40 to 50% of approval mean? If we wanted to write it out as a political scientist, what I would say is I am 95% confident that the value in the population is somewhere between 40 and 50%. I'm 95% confident. It means I have a 5% chance of being wrong. But I'm, there's always a chance of error because it's a sample for a lot of reasons. However, if you're going to pay me money for the true, and reveal the true number, I would say it's somewhere between 40 and 50. And that is why I'm emphasizing again the idea of the margin of error. Because you can't just say, you need that range for the confidence. That's where the confidence comes from. The 95% confident isn't the point estimate. It's the range within where it's sitting. It's somewhere between 40 and 50. And right in the smack in the middle is 45, so we're going to go 45 because that allows us to capture the range, but we aren't saying 100% it's 45. It could be 44. It could be 42. But we're 95% confident it's somewhere between 40 and 50. And when you think about it like that, you can see that polls are not that accurate. And that's not the fault of the polling. That's just how predicting the future works. You have to be humble and acknowledge the possibility that you're wrong. And you have to speak without making declarations of what true things are, because, you could be in error. So, so the other thing I want to I could actually do an entire, whole show just on polling and sampling and estimates and all this stuff. But the last thing I want to leave you with is, let me summarize the last thing. Margin of error will always be based off of the sampling size. So you need at least 250 cases for a sample with probably like a 5.5% margin of error if the sampling is done correctly. So a small sample size doesn't matter if it's accurate. If it's a 300-person respondents, but they actually match the population, it doesn't matter that it's only 300. What matters is the sample looks good. So just to give you kind of a sense of how size and quality link into our confidence and our ability to say, okay, we have a 3% margin of error or a 4% margin of error here. The other thing that will matter when you look at polling results is who they're asking, because changing the population will change the responses you get. So think about it. People who are registered voters will probably be more likely to pay attention to politics. They're probably more likely to know the candidates and know their positions. They are probably more set in their opinions and have firmer opinions on things. And therefore, when they give you an approval or a disapproval, they are speaking from a kind of a level of expertise. Now, if you just take any person, any adult, you might pick up somebody who hates politics, who tries to avoid it. They might not, they might turn off the news when it comes on, or they might have only been exposed to certain kinds of news because they work, let's say, in a place that has Fox News on in the background, and so what they get is filtered through Fox News. And they're not really interested enough to kind of filter out or care about it. They got other stuff going on in their lives, right? And therefore, their opinions, even though they will have their responses will be seen as equal, you can see how they're from different populations. And so another thing that will add differences into the polls, into the results, is who is being asked. Registered voters are probably the most, a poll of registered voters is probably closest to what the final result will be, because you are polling people who have a history of actually doing the thing that they say they're going to do. And a lot of people, might have the intention to vote, but don't follow through. And so their opinions, while interesting, will not matter to the result. And so figuring out who should be counted in these polls is a subject itself of massive debate inside the polling community, because each polling firm has what they call a likely voter model. And a likely voter model, or a likely voter, is someone who, again, is likely to vote, but you can't tell the future. You don't know if they're actually going to follow through. And some people say they're going to vote and they don't. And some people say they aren't going to vote and they do. So that's where you get also a chance for error inside these polls. So registered voters is probably the one that is going to get you closest to the actual final result. But by only going with registered voters, you or screening somehow based on a prior vote history, or you're getting their name off the voter register list, so you're only sampling people with a history of voting, you're going to miss out on people who might have moved into the district, who have to register yet but haven't voted there, like from out of state. Maybe they're students because they're migrating over, they're like going to university in a different place, so they don't have a voting record. First-time voters, right? New citizens. Lots of people will not be put into that pool of registered voters. So on the one hand, you have a reliable population in terms of their behaviors, which is valuable. But on the other hand, you're being a bit too narrow in the possibility in terms of representing the total numbers of people who can vote. I don't know if you're kind of catching on to this, but predicting outcomes is really hard, right? And polling people, political scientists, we're constantly having to do trade-offs of accuracy and precision for inclusivity and capturing variation. It's never clear. It's never easy how to predict the future. All right, so that's registered voters. So there are some real advantages to looking at registered voter results. I think you can probably see that. Likely voters, and again, I was talking about the likely voter model. A likely voter sample is including people who might not have a history of, are registered voters, but who carry the characteristics, or who possess the characteristics of all the things that would predict that they should vote. So, I mean, there's things about like voting history and partisan level and education. There's a whole, like, and the thing is, like, developing your likely voter model is not something that there's like one likely voter model. Let's just take a look here. Models. All right. Yeah, let's just go quickly at a definition. Hey, let's look at, how do Gallup's likely voter models work? Can likely voter models be improved? Measuring the likelihood to vote. Likely voters. Likely voter models in a global context. And AAPOR is, I think, like the American Association of Political Opinion Researchers. Right. These are really contentious ideas. Not contentious. They're constantly negotiated and debated and revised, because who votes is constantly changing as more people go to university, those kinds of things. So anyway, what do they say here? Since 1950, Gallup has used a likely voter model to identify Americans who are most likely to vote in an upcoming presidential election. These procedures address the need to winnow down the national adult or registered voter surveys to a subset of responders who are most representative of the likely voter electorate. Many more people say they will vote than actually do. So it is not sufficient to simply ask people whether they will vote. People have good intentions, so they might intend to vote, but then fail to follow through. And that's, like, in their lives, that's fine. But for a pollster, we kind of count on people saying they're going to do what they say they're going to do. And when people change their minds after they say something to a poll, that is error in the poll. And it's not the pollster's fault, and it's not the voter's fault. It's just reality. So getting back to the Gallup article, Gallup's likely voter procedures involve asking poll respondents a variety of questions about their interest in the upcoming election, their past voting behavior, their intention to vote in the upcoming election. See the exact wording in the question wording section. Gallup analysts have developed and validated these questions over the years and have modified them as necessary to take into account new information and changes in the way in which the voting process takes place. So Gallup gives respondents 1 point for each question they answer in a way consistent with voting, and then that results in an overall likelihood of voting score that ranges from 0 to 7. Gallup then uses various procedures, polling house secrets. Gallup has then used various procedures to set a threshold for the pool of likely voters. The validity of setting a threshold based on a specific estimated turnout among the voting age population or voter-eligible population is less clear than it was in the past, particularly given real-world changes in voting, such as early voting, and decreases in survey participation. People just ain't doing nice things for polling companies for free anymore the way they used to. All right, so that is how Gallup does it, right? And they describe their process. And yeah, let's have a look here at Pew, because Pew is another reputable polling outfit that works very hard at being accurate. Again, their money comes from their clients because their clients think that they're going to get accurate information. Measuring the likelihood to vote. The survey literature has long shown that more respondents say they intend to vote than actually cast a ballot, e.g. Bernstein et al., 2001, Silver et al., 1986. In addition, some people say they do not expect to vote, but actually do, perhaps because they are contacted by a campaign or a friend close to Election Day and are persuaded to turn out. These situations potentially introduce error into election forecasts because these stealth voters and non-voters often differ in their political preferences. in general, Republicans are more likely than Democrats to turn out, though they may be about equally likely to say they intend to vote. As a consequence, pollsters do not rely solely upon, and by the way, a lot of times what you find in the UK is people underestimate, polling firms underestimate the conservative vote. More often, they tend to have a bias toward the left because I think this is maybe transferable. People on the left, oh yeah, I'm going to vote, and then for some reason, like work comes up, whatever else, they end up not following through, and then the election result is different. As a consequence, the Pew author goes on to write, pollsters do not rely solely upon a respondent's stated intention when classifying a person as likely to vote or not. Instead, most ask several questions that collectively can be used to estimate an individual's likelihood of voting, and the questions measure intention to vote, past voting behavior, knowledge about the voting process, and interest in the campaign. So you can say it's not the exact same set of questions asked by Gallup. Everyone has similar questions, but they kind of like tweak them here and there. So let's see what they've got here. These are the questions that they've asked. How much thought have you given to the upcoming November election? And then they give options quite a lot, some only a bit. Have you ever voted in your precinct or election district? Would you say that what's going on in government and public affairs, would you say you follow what's going on in government and public affairs? How often would you say you vote? How likely are you to vote in the November election? In 2012, between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, did things come up that kept you from voting, or did you happen to vote? What a terrible question. I'm sorry. This is a terrible question. How Pew? Seriously. All right, so first, okay. I mean, you're introducing, all right, here's my problem. If they had said, in the 2012 presidential election between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, did you vote? And then they say yes or no. If you say, did things come up that kept you from voting, or did you happen to vote? You're kind of giving somebody an out, and maybe this is intentional. You're giving somebody, oh yeah, things just happened to come up, I didn't vote. But you're not supposed to have like a double barrel question. There's a lot going on in there. So anyway, I am not entirely happy with that question. I'm sure the pollster will tell me why I'm wrong. Please rate your chance of voting in November on a scale of 1 to 10. And then that self-rating becomes part of it. It's not always accurate. People can't predict their own behaviors. That's true. People can't predict their own behaviors. Like, even people can't predict it. So, as we see, the likely voter model is a construct. So, the likely voter model is not based on purely going off of the voter register, right? So, if you only have registered voters that you're polling, you have a sample of the voting population, but it's not representative of everybody who could vote. If you have all adults, you capture everyone who's possibly going to vote, but you're going to get a lot of people in there who won't. So the likely voter model is a bit of a way to both take on board the certainty of, or the increased likelihood that somebody who's voted in the past will vote again, but also try to capture people who might not otherwise get picked up on that. That means you can't compare directly a registered voter sample to an all voters. I mean, they're kind of in the same wheelhouse. They're kind of in the wheelhouse. So it's kind of in the same Venn diagram, but they're not a one-to-one. And so when you see something like, here you've got 49 to 48%, 44, that one's pretty close. But just make sure that when you're looking at a poll, look at whether, especially for politics, have a look to see whether it's a likely voter respondents that participated, all eligible Americans, all adults, or a registered voter sample. That will tell you a little bit about the types of people who are answering that question. Okay, so stealth voter, yeah, stealthy, ninja voters. Of course, some may simply lie to pollsters. I do it all the time. Yeah, and that's another thing too. A source of error is that one of the assumptions that you're making when you are looking at polling data is that the people who answered the poll were being as truthful as they possibly could be. And one source of error in a poll can be people lying. Now, there's no lie detectors, On the other hand, I think generally, lying is done around the margins. I would put up a deliberate lie somewhere around like people who are trying to recall something and can't quite get it right. I think that kind of margin of error is kind of built into the noise. So I don't think that we have to worry too much about people who give shady answers, or because I mean in polling forever we've known about, it's called social desirability. And social desirability is the understanding that when you ask certain questions, you're going to get people giving you the answer they think that they should give because it's socially appropriate rather than the honest answer. And so you have to figure when you get a question that has an element of social desirability in it, that if you find that people are answering in a way that you expect, it's probably not accurate. Some of those people are going to give you the answer they think you want to hear. For instance, if I were to look at a survey of people describing their sexual histories, and I saw that, let's say, in a socially conservative state, women were reporting on average 3 partners, and men were reporting on average 35 partners, I would have to seriously doubt that those numbers actually reflect the sexual histories of the people in the survey. I would assume that there is some amount of underreporting on behalf of the women because it's socially, especially like in a conservative area, it's considered socially undesirable for women to have a lot of partners. And even when if you have your own mindset and you're liberated and you think that, like it doesn't matter how many partners you have, you still live in that society, right? So maybe some people can overcome that, others won't. So I'm going to assume that there is a social desirability that pulls women to underreport their sexual partner's history. And for men, it's just the opposite because of the way that toxic masculinity is structured in our society. A man might feel like if he's only slept with 3 women, he's really quite a failure. Or if he's only slept with 1 woman. So he might, I didn't sleep with this one, but we did fool around, so I'm going to count this, then the other, like over-reporting on behalf of men. And we know that those kinds of psychological reactions to polling questions, and also the interviewer effects, the fact that you're answering, if you're answering to a person, you're more likely to lie. If you are giving what you think is an anonymous response, because, you've been said, this, we're not going to link this to your name. This is an anonymous poll that you're getting from email, from an outfit like YouGov. We see people give different answers when they think, it's true, but when they know that their responses can't be linked to them personally and they don't have to say the words out loud to another person, people are more honest. And so just in terms of lying. Ninja voter, yes. To be clear, I only do it to the Tory exit pollsters. It's a sport. Okay, that's fine, Reade. But I'm just saying that it's a source of error. Like people either misremembering or not remembering, or just giving another answer than the truth. Those are all possible sources of errors in polls, all of them. And we have to account for them as well. Trump wasn't loved around, as people have said. He thinks, in my point of view, in terms of the Electoral College. No, I don't think Trump was loved either at any point. Okay, so I think I'm going to leave it there. I realized as I got deeper into this topic, there's so much to talk about when it comes to polling. So the 3 things I want you to take away, I think that's it, is 1, when you see a point estimate, look for the margin of error and add that plus or minus to your point estimate to get the ranges. Because then if there is a difference outside of the margin of error, then it's real. That's my rule. And you won't see that very often. A lot of times there's just too much chance of overlap for you to feel really confident about an outcome. That's probably wise because the future is hard to predict. So that's one of it. 2, understanding the sample size, that the sample size itself, if it's done well, if the sampling methodology is properly done. I'm just going to assume that for all the polls I'm going to talk about now. It's not always the case, but I'm going to assume it. You should have at least 250 as N, which is the number of observations or cases. And also, you are probably unlikely to see polls that have things like 4,000 respondents and 5,000 respondents. That's because there is a drop-off in the amount of accuracy you get with the number of people. So to say, let's say you start with 250 as your sample, your N, your margin of error there is going to be like 5.5%. It's going to have a lot of possibility for error because you're only looking at, maybe 250 people. Then let's say you jump up to like 400 and you go from 5.5 to like 4.2% margin of error. That's a really good, you gain almost like a 1.5 points on either side. So fiscally and methodologically, it makes sense why you would want to go up like to a 450. When you get to like 1,000, 1,200, you're looking at 3% margin of error, 2 point something percent margin of error for 1,000 respondents or 1,500 respondents. But then to kind of get to the point where you have a 1% margin of error, you're looking at like 10,000 respondents. And a commercial survey company just doesn't have the kind of money to pay an extra, 8,000 people or 9,000 people for a 1% reduction in the margin of error. It's just not, like, this isn't medicine. People aren't going to die if you get maybe if you get a bad leader. But polling results can tolerate a 3 or 4%, 5% margin of error. Medical treatments can't, right? So there isn't as much of an investment, there isn't as much of a payoff in really jacking up your sample size, because what you get from going from 250 to 700 respondents, is a lot more effective in terms of reducing your margin of error than once you get to like the 2% margin of error phase. So that's the other thing to look for. And another would be that you want to look at trends over time. So any one-off snapshot is interesting, but put it in the context of other polls at the time and also what was happening with polling the week before it. And look at who is responding. Is it all adults? Is it likely voters, or is it registered voters? I have a feeling here that this rating must be the 538.com. I didn't really pay attention to this, but I'm just seeing here now that Rasmussen is getting a C+. That to me sounds kind of generous, but yes. So this is about historical accuracy and the methodology of each firm. And I think Rasmussen's trash. I think who's been banned? Oh, Research 2000's been banned by 538. They are so unreliable, they won't take them. Look at this. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of the quality, reputable of firms. So the better you are at predicting the future, and even here, they've got the mean reverted bias in terms of if there's a sort of a tendency to get certain kinds of voters versus the other ones here. So so Rasmussen tends to lean oversample Republicans. This one's out. Survey USA is basically, if you've got a 0.1% Dem lean mean, I think that's pretty impressive. Research 2000 looks trash. Harris Insight also not that great, but not nearly as, look at these two firms. TJC Research plus 4.5 Republican bias, Strategic Vision and F rating at a 1.6 Republican bias, and then the other one is a Dem oversampling kind of place. So that was just a little bit. If you guys found this interesting, I can talk about other elements like sampling frames and how we can actually, how the maths behind that. But it feels like I've been talking for a long time. How long have I been talking? Oh my gosh, an hour and 50 minutes. That was way, 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 way longer than I intended to go. Okay. I am going to take a break. My coffee is cold. I don't have to make more coffee. I will, though, have to heat it up. And in the next section, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and I am going to cover 2 reports that came out. I want to talk about the Tara Reid situation, but I don't want to talk about Tara Reid personally. I want to talk about the journalistic failings of the people who started this story out and their responsibility for putting Tara Reid in a terrible position. So I don't want to exculpate her or exonerate her of all her Tara Reid's responsibilities for her words and her actions. However, there were journalistic standards and gatekeepers who could have prevented her from being the focus of the national attention spotlight and being her life being torn into that she's currently experiencing. So the other one was PBS. We're going to look at that one. That's come out since the last time we spoke. Yep, okay. And then, oh gosh, was it? I mean, there's someone else who just put out, I have to look it up during the break. There's one other reporter who kind of just did a summary piece, but I'll find it online. Yes, it is coffee time. Peanut butter jelly time. Making hot coffee time. Something like that. Anyway. Yeah, so it's going to be blues music now for the next 5 minutes while I sort my stuff out, and then we'll come back. We'll do like 30 minutes and then wrap it up. So I will see you guys in a bit. Enjoy your break. Time to bring up the music again. I have to scroll down for the music. So do. There we go. Enjoy. See you in a bit. Hey guys, I am back. Did I unmute my mic? Yes, I did. Excellent. There's a lot of things to remember when you're doing a live show all by yourself. I hope you guys had a good break. I've got my Notorious RBG mug. I don't know if you guys have seen this. I show it to you. Oh, wrong way. Yeah, that was a gift. There's also lipstick on it. Gotta just deal with that. But this was a gift from a friend of mine. I love the Notorious RBG like that. I thought it was hilarious. So yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about the Tara Reid situation, because things came up this week that I think are relevant moving forward. Now, on declaring this, I am going to say that having not jumped on the I Believe Tara Reid bandwagon immediately after she gave her interview to Katie Halper has hurt me. I've lost subs. People have abandoned me. If you guys remember 250 in the chat, 250 just started trolling random videos that I did saying I believe Tara Reid. They've stopped now. But if you guys are a longtime viewer of the show, you guys will know, and if you haven't, I'll let you update you. I was cautious from the start about the Tara Reid account. So when she first gave her interview to Katie Halper, when she came out, so basically when she gave her first interview based on her new allegations, right? Because she's had allegations in the past, right? You guys remember. So when she came out with her new allegations, the person she gave an interview to, who would publish it, was Katie Halper. And when the accusation came up, I'm just going to walk you through it for background. When the accusation came up, I was getting asked to react to it on Twitter. That was the first time. The first time I became aware, from my recollection, the first time I became aware of the Tara Reid story was people were jumping into my mentions going, oh, what do you think of this? Biden is a rapist. And so when people ask, do that kind of stuff, especially when it comes to politics, I need to know what I'm talking about. So I went back and I looked at Tara Reid's writings and her other posts and her history, and then what she's saying now. And as you guys might remember, I was like, there's changes. And what bothered me about the Tara Reid story in particular was not that she couldn't recall specific details about the trauma, about the event that she was alleging in terms of a sexual assault. That's completely understandable. You get why somebody who is traumatized by something doesn't, you don't spend time just in those memories. You don't put yourself back in there unless you have to, or, like whatever. So having general recollections of your feelings, the situation, the sensory input, not knowing the time of day or on exactly where you were stood, I get all that. And I would never expect anyone who is a victim to have perfect recall, because that's ridiculous. However, what bothered me about her story is that she was changing details in her versions year on year about things that didn't matter. She was changing details about, like, first she quit Biden's office to move out west to be with her boyfriend. Then she was encouraged to resign from Biden's office. And then Biden fired her. And I was like, that doesn't have to change. Stuff like that shouldn't change over time. But what I saw, too, was that in her first post, her narrative was, I'm in this strong, independent woman. I'm going to move out west and I'm going to make my life for myself, so I quit. And then when she started doing more of the I was victimized, things started to shift toward, oh, I was pushed out. And then when she claimed she was sexually assaulted, then she was fired. And I'd say it just set off alarm bells for me. Things that shouldn't change about your story, they shouldn't change. And so, I don't want to go into it too much, but I've got some history with being victimized, right? And it happened in my first term it was an undergraduate year of university. I know it was before midterms because I flunked all my midterms. I know I ended up on academic probation that year. I know, I was taking a Russian class. And I remember that clearly because I had to take it again. I flunked algebra, so I had to take that again. Like, I wouldn't change the kinds of classes I was taking when I was telling that story, if you see what I mean. Like, there are things around the time of what happened that have nothing to do with what happened, that just stay static. So on the one hand, I'm quite sympathetic to victims and anyone brave enough to come forward, even post Me Too. Because the other thing is, you're going to get ripped apart in the media. Your background is going to be looked at, absolutely, when you make those kinds of, when you come forward with those accusations. So I think, our sympathetic and realistic understanding of what victims can and cannot reasonably recall. On the other hand, I've also been falsely accused of doxing someone, and I received a lot of hate and abuse, and I was doxed myself, and I was swatted. People tried to contact my employer to get me fired. People sent me fake cease and desist notices. I had all kinds of harassment because Bering falsely accused me of doing something he knew was done by Cobalt Cat. But it wasn't as fun, it wasn't as profitable for him to be doxed by someone from Encyclopedia Dramatica as it was if he told the story that he had been doxed by a feminist. So he had a lot of fun with that, but I suffered because of that false accusation. So I find myself in a position where I feel I owe both parties my honest judgment. That's what got me in trouble initially. Like, that's where the fact that I didn't immediately after Tara gave her interview just say, I find her credible, I believe her, and it's not only that I find her story credible, it's just I'm going to say that I've decided Joe Biden is a rapist. Like, this is what happened. People were calling Joe Biden a rapist without him even giving a side. And that to me was just like, there wasn't the kind of corroboration that we've seen in other Me Too cases where other people come forward with similar patterns but slightly different situations because a predator has a repeat pattern. So that got me in a lot of trouble. Not a lot of trouble, to be honest, but it put me at odds, I should say. My cautious approach and my hesitation to leap toward calling somebody a rapist without even hearing their side of it, it made me a little bit unpopular in parts of left-wing YouTube. I've been called a rape apologist by far left people. And, my name has been brought up on other shows because I took a cautious approach. Looks like my cautious approach was warranted. And I'm not seeing any apologies coming through my inbox, just so you know. So I just, what I've learned from being on YouTube long enough is that initially you say some things and you have opinions, and people flock to you because you might be saying something that needs to be said or saying something in a way that should be said and hasn't been or whatever. But then after a while, you start expressing other parts of your opinions and people are like, oh, I don't like that. And that's just how it goes. Like, you get a bigger platform and then you start to lose people. It's a cost of rule thing, just like with politicians. So whatever, I'm not going anywhere, and I'm never going to lie to you guys. I'm never going to pander to a crowd for money, and I'm never going to look in the camera and tell you something that I honestly don't think is true. So, initially, the whole thing was Tara's story. Tara was telling her side of things. Her information was being looked at. And it took Biden's campaign. First, Biden's campaign didn't engage with it. Then it was like still the primaries were going on. Then initially his campaign staffer issued a refusal. And then Bernie dropped out. And the story kept going. It still had legs. So eventually Joe Biden did address it on Morning Joe. And he did a flat denial. Another thing that I'm going to be honest. Another thing that Biden did that impresses me, that rings true, is this week he said, actually I'll pull it up because I think it's worth quoting him accurately. He was asked about Biden vote for me. Yeah, so let me just get this quote correctly. Right. In the Thursday interview, Biden... Oh, no. Sorry. Go up further. Former Vice President Joe Biden again denied the sexual assault allegation made against him by former Senate staffer Tara Reid in an interview on MSNBC Thursday night, but added that voters who stand by Reid should not support him. Quote, "If they believe Tara Reid, then they probably shouldn't vote for me," Biden said when asked what message he would give to women voters who accept Reid's allegations. Okay, first of all, I hate the way that women are linked with victimization because, one, it hurts women by only framing women as possible victims, but it also makes men who are victims and trans people invisible. So we just talk about, this is a heteronormative framing. 5 quid. Thank you, Flint, for not pandering, for putting up with us and Kev. Hey, Flint, if you don't mind, and give me a hug. Pull it in here. Give you a big hug. Thank you for that. I appreciate your support, financial and emotional and moral. Thank you. So when to female voters who accept Reade's allegations as true, but were planning on supporting him, quote, "I wouldn't vote for me if I believed Tara Reid," Biden added. That rang so true to me. And I don't want to judge people, because I know people come to their own decisions, but if I actually thought Tara Reid was telling the truth about everything, and there was a pattern of sexual predation here that was like other Me Too cases, I don't think I could vote for Biden. I really don't. And I don't want to judge anybody, but when I see someone say on Twitter, "I believe Tara Reid, but I'm voting for Biden anyway," I just no judgment. I couldn't. I couldn't vote for someone I actually thought was a rapist. I couldn't. And again, no shade, because I know people make trade-offs all the time. But I guess maybe for me, that's another reason why I didn't just leap into believing Tara Reid, is because I really, I had to know. I felt like I needed to know in my own heart where I stood on these accusations, because it was going to affect whether or not I even was able to cast a vote in November on the presidential ticket. So the fact that Joe Biden came out and his initial response was, "Look, Tara Reid has an ability to say what she wants, and so do I. And what I say is I didn't do this, that I am willing to be completely transparent, and I am calling on the Senate National Archives with the records to open up. I give permission. I'm an open book. Go ahead and don't even just look for Reid's allegation. Look for any allegation. You find anyone making an allegation of sexual harassment against me on the employment file. I want to know about it now. I don't know what more an innocent person could say than that. Because that's how I felt. Again, with my being falsely accused. I knew I was innocent. And so I was not afraid of new information coming out, because new information would exonerate me, and if it was not going to exonerate me, it was doctored. And there was some doctored evidence put out against me as well. And I could prove, and I got okay, let me break this down. I'm going to show you why this is a forgery. And so for him to then come out and also say, "Look, if you believe Tara Reid, don't vote for me." Again, this just doesn't sound like something who didn't believe in his own innocence would say. He's saying, judge me, fine, hold me to that standard. And so for me, this is impressive on Biden's behalf. The other thing that someone else mentioned on Twitter is that if you would have compared, let's say Tara Reid had made this accusation against Donald Trump. Donald Trump would have already attacked her looks, attacked her character, talked about her in a negative way in a rally situation on national news and on Twitter. He would have tried to destroy her as a person. He would have tried to destroy her in terms of the aesthetics of who she was, and he would have called her names. And Joe Biden hasn't done any of that. For all of the things that have been said about Joe Biden with regard to Tara Reid, Joe Biden has not attacked her physically. He didn't attack her her looks, I should say. He didn't verbally put her down or humiliate her. He's always indicated that he thinks she has a right to say what she does, and that what he is offering when it comes to his rights is complete transparency. So, I'm going to authorize that for you. Where was I? Okay, I got distracted. Okay, so I think that to me was incredibly impressive, and it shows to me a difference in transparency between what Tara Reid has been doing and what Joe Biden has been doing. So the allegations came out. So I'm talking about myself. So we'll move on now from my fifis and, my wounded feelings of people calling me a rape apologist on Twitter. That's stopped, by the way. That's really calmed down now since her story has increasingly been broken down as not believable. So one of the things that has come out since the start of the story, since the initial Halper interview, podcast, and everything else, is that there's actually there were a lot of news outlets that looked into Tara Reid's story and decided not. So let me back that up. There are a lot of professional news outlets and professional journalists who have been in contact with Tara Reid and talking with Tara Reid for going on a year now. She's been interviewed by multiple media outlets, and the media outlets haven't taken her story forward. The reputable, professional, journalistic standard abiding outlets didn't run with her story. And they didn't run with her story because it had problems, they couldn't verify information, and there was just there wasn't enough underneath there in terms of supporting the allegations for them to move forward. And maybe there's some, and I get it, like a newspaper could be sued for supporting and publishing a false accusation. So I get why they're going to be a little bit cautious. Why? Ooh, wow, that got big. What happened there? Oh, I guess it got pulled out. Okay, we'll pop that right back in there. I was just going to move something else down here on my other screen. All right. So one of the pieces that came out was from Laura McGann, and she told her story of interactions with Tara Reid. If you haven't read this piece, I strongly recommend it. It's long form. We don't have time to go over it. But just to summarize parts of it, I started reporting on Tara Reid's story a year ago. Here's what I found and where I'm stuck. In April of 2019, a woman named Tara Reid reached out to me with a clear, consistent story to tell about her experience as a staffer in Joe Biden's Senate office in 1993. I spent hours on the phone with her, and many more tracking down possible witnesses and documents trying to confirm her account. All right, so Laura McGann here details her back and forth interactions with Tara Reid, and ultimately why she didn't go forward with the story. And I'm going to get to a piece that kind of summarizes parts of this. Let's see. Here we go. If Reid had told a consistent story and shared all of her corroborating sources with reporters, if those sources had told a consistent story, if the union piece had shaken loose other cases like hers, or if there was a smoking gun evidence in Biden's papers, her account might have been reported on differently in mainstream media a year ago. But it's not fair to an individual survivor that their claims require extraordinary levels of confirmation, but it's what reporters have found necessary for their stories to hold up to public scrutiny and successfully hold powerful men to account. So here we are. What do you do with someone who makes an accusation but doesn't have enough evidence to go forward? Do you run with the story or not? And Laura McGann here chose not to. So that came out, and one of the things that came out of this was that Tara Reid had been saying recently that she didn't come out sooner because she had been shut out by the media. This story shows she's actually been talking to people from the Washington Post and to Vox and the Associated Press for behind the scenes for a year. So that's not true. It's another case of her saying something that she just doesn't have to lie about. She doesn't have to, not be honest about, and yet she was not truthful. So I guess this is pretty good. All right, let's see what else. Oh, yes. Let's go with a PBS one because I don't really like the Politico headline that much. PBS did a real deep dive. They found 74 former staffers of Biden, 62 of whom were women. And I think it's not because his hiring, he tended to hire more women than men. I think they oversampled women in his previous staff hirings, because if there was going to be a victimization with another member of staff in a similar way, because remember, predators have patterns, that it would more likely happen to a woman staffer. So they made sure that they talked to a lot of women who were on staff to give the opportunity for another story like that to come forward. So the PBS NewsHour spoke with 74 former Biden staffers, of whom 62 were women, in order to get a broader picture of his behavior toward women over the course of his career, how they see the new allegations, and whether there was evidence of a larger pattern. None of the people interviewed had said they had experienced sexual harassment, assault, or misconduct by Biden. All said they had never heard any rumors or allegations of Biden engaging in sexual misconduct until the recent assault allegations made by Tara Reid. Former staffers said they believed Reid should be heard and acknowledged that their experiences do not disprove her accusations. And that's true. I mean, you can point to Farmer Brown's field and say, well, look, Farmer Brown hasn't had an asteroid land in her field ever, so it's impossible that asteroids could ever land in Farmer Brown's field. That doesn't preclude the fact that you haven't observed it doesn't mean it couldn't possibly exist. However, if there is a pattern and you go looking for the pattern among the staff, right, and that's what would be established here, is that Biden is taking advantage of his staff, and you go to all the staff people and they go, nah, that didn't happen to me, then you have to take that into account. Like, why is that? So in all, the NewsHour tried to contact nearly 200 former staffers, primarily based on public records of his time in the Senate and White House. They include former interns and Senate aides from 1972 through his time at the White House. The interviews reveal previously unreported details about Biden's office where Reid worked, such as his account that she lost her job because of her poor performance and not as retaliation for lodging complaints about sexual harassment, as Reid said. Yes, so another problem with the way that Katie Halper and Ryan Grimm, I'm just going to name names. Let's talk about these people. So I'm holding these reporters personally morally culpable for the situation, the negative situation Tara Reid finds herself in today, because they enabled her accusations that were clearly lacking in evidentiary merit to back them up. But because of the political agenda of these three individuals, they found it useful to publish her accusations, and because they didn't, this is the point that was brought up on Twitter, because they didn't vet properly, because Katie Halper failed as a reporter, and Ryan Grimm failed as a reporter, and Nathan J. Robinson failed as a reporter in terms of their due diligence and background checks and sourcing and making sure they had all their ducks in a row, the way that Laura McGann did here, and the AP did, and the Washington Post, because they decided not to vet, because these three individuals, especially Halper and Grimm, failed to do due diligence, failed to do their duties, and to vet the story properly. Instead of vetting Tara Reid's life in private, which is what the AP and the Washington Post and Vox did, they put her story out there, and now she is being vetted in public. And it's their fault. So Tara Reid obviously is accountable for what she says, but I don't think Katie Halper is getting nearly enough criticism. Ryan Grimm is not getting nearly enough criticism. Nathan J. Robinson is not getting nearly enough criticism for their journalistic failures that have led this woman to have her life torn up in public. And as much as I disagree with, how should I say this? I don't find Tara Reid credible at all. In fact, I can point to a specific instance where she deliberately, and we talked about it, she edited her previous writings in 2020 to match her new story that she was about to tell Katie Halper, and then she left the 2019 date on her Medium post to make it look like she's always, like for the last year, she was accusing Joe Biden of sexual misconduct. And when she did that, she lied to me, she lied to all of the readers, she lied to everyone by her lie of omission and by deceptively editing her text to change the narrative from saying this is not a story about sexual misconduct to this is not only a story about sexual misconduct. Right? She crossed a line for me there. Right? I don't find her credible. On the other hand, it pains me to see her court records with her divorce or the restraining order that she got out against her husband being pulled up for everyone to look into, because that's not just about her, that's about her ex. And her ex did not ask to be dragged into this crap. All right. People are being interviewed and coming forward and telling all kinds of stories about her, about their experiences or negative experiences with her. And they're saying, here's how she conned me, here's how she lied to me, here's how she manipulated me. And Tara Reid is now, like, her reputation is being trashed. Now, it's one thing to have your reputation trashed with the people that you did that stuff to. You know, like, if I screwed somebody over in the past and they were mad at me and their friends are mad at me, that's kind of like one thing. But I don't want that stuff talked about on Meet the Press. I don't want that stuff to be fodder on Twitter. And the reason it's fodder on Twitter is because Ryan Grimm and Katie Halper and Nate Robinson failed to vet properly. And now the public is vetting Tara Reid. And that's a horrible run. Like, no one wants to do that. And you call it a crucible? So in some ways, I feel like Tara Reid has been victimized by these journalists who stepped on her to try to discredit the Biden candidacy because they wanted Bernie to be the candidate instead. These three used her and used her story and found her politically convenient. And by doing so, they did a disservice to Tara Reid. They did a disservice to me too. And, they just proved their lack of journalistic integrity. All right, so there was this. Okay, let's just look at this by Jonathan Chait, which I think is a very fair review, shall we say, of some of the things that have become, so for me, have become flags subsequent to me finding out she edited her Medium post. So for me, when I found out Tara Reid, who again, as I have pointed out, she completed law school, right? She's not a stupid woman. She has worked on issues of domestic violence and survivors and all that stuff. She knows how evidence works, things like that. When she deliberately changed her story 2 days before she gave a podcast where she changed her story, if she was open about her edits and she'd made a note saying, I have updated this and the original can be found here, she and I would be cool, right? I don't care that you make changes to your story as long as I know that you've made those changes. You're being honest about your edits and your time frame. But if you lie to me once, why would I believe you? Especially when the whole thing here is credibility, right? How can I believe you when I know you lied to me, right? So anyway, let's just read what Jonathan Chait has to say. When Tara Reid first made her assault allegations against Joe Biden, I thought the charge was more likely to be true than false. To be clear, I had no intention of changing my vote. Again, Christie commentary. I don't get it. The allegation came too late to reopen the nominating process without doing violence to the expressed will of the electorate. And I've always believed the primary criteria for voting on a candidate is their policy impact, which is why I wrote a column in 2018 defending Republicans who still supported Roy Moore over Doug Jones. But I did feel bad about voting for a candidate I suspected had done something terrible. Since then, 3 detailed reports by Vox's Laura McGann, PBS NewsHour, and Politico's Natasha Korecki, which is right here. And again, I am angry about the Tara Reid situation, but I'm trying to not use sexist, derogatory, demeaning language. I'm not saying I'm always successful, but like this headline makes me feel, it might be accurate. Also, it kind of makes me feel uncomfortable. Manipulative, deceitful user Tara Reid left a trail of aggrieved acquaintances. Like if it was just Tara Reid left a trail of aggrieved acquaintances, I would actually not have a problem with this title because it's descriptive, it's correct. But by putting manipulative, deceitful user and then her name, I just feel like this is kind of feeds into the whole, it's a crazy woman who is, making these charges. And I think we can just look at the evidence. We don't have to go into the kind of personal attacks. Anyway, since then, 3 detailed reports have delved into Reid's allegations. Neither reaches a definitive conclusion. I think he means none of them, but anyway. But all of them, on balance, add a lot of ground for skepticism. At this point, Reade's allegation seems to me more likely to be false than true. So the more Jonathan and anyone, I think for me, looked into it, the less credible the allegations became, not the more credible. McCann's story recounts her year-long effort to report on and corroborate Reade's claims. The main problem she describes is that Reade dramatically changed her allegations. Reporters knew that Reade had previously described a culture of harassment without sexual assault. And then, in March, suddenly she added a specific account of sexual assault. This did not prove her account was false. Sometimes survivors of sexual assaults unroll elements of the offense over time. But McCann, by revisiting the two accounts and trying to understand the reason Reade changed them, zeroes in on two specific problems. 1. Reade's account of why she changed her story seems to not be true. McCann describes a lengthy and sympathetic effort to prove Reade's charge of sexual harassment. The first story. She was surprised when Reade claimed she had decided not to share the full story because reporters were shutting her down. Quote, in a recent conversation, McCann writes, I asked Reade why she would say the media was shutting her down when she was initially so adamant with me and other outlets that this wasn't a misconduct story. The only answer she gave was that she was speaking about the response to her claims collectively. And in her opinion, the added details still fit her construct that, quote, this is not a story about sexual misconduct, unquote, because she told me sexual assault itself is about power. I'll just leave you guys to think about that. If you follow the entire account of McCann's contact with Reade, this is a little hard to swallow. 2. Reade's friend admitted to lying to a reporter to fit Reade's narrative. McCann spoke with one Reade friend who told her last year that Biden had harassed Reade, but had definitely not sexually assaulted her. Quote, last Reade encouraged me to speak with a friend of hers who counseled her through the time in Biden's office in 1992 and 1993. The friend was clear about what happened and what hadn't. On the scale of things, so this is the friend, quote, on the scale of things we heard, I feel ashamed, but it wasn't that bad. Biden never tried to kiss her directly. He never went for one of those touches. It was one of those, sorry you took it that way. I know that's very hard to explain, the friend told me. She went on, what was creepy was that it was always in front of people. After Reade changed her allegations, McCann circled back to the friend, who explained that she had said something the friend knew to be false because Reade, quote, wanted to leave a layer there, unquote. McCann writes, I spoke with Reade's friend again this week. She said that Reade had told her about the alleged assault the week it happened in 1993. I asked the friend why then did she volunteer so explicitly that Biden, quote, never tried to kiss her, unquote, or touch her inappropriately. The friend replies, quote, it just organically rolled out that way, the friend said. Reade and I had many conversations a year ago about what her degree of comfort was. She wanted to leave a layer there, and I did not want to betray that. It just wasn't my place, unquote. The author, Jonathan Chait, writes, omitting a relevant detail to protect your friend is one thing. Adding in a false detail is another. Next, the PBS NewsHour report turns up several more problems for Reade, and had Halper and Grimm and Robinson done their work, Reade wouldn't be being dragged through the press like this. Shame on them. All 74 Biden staffers NewsHour contacted did not know of any sexual assault. Many of these former Biden staffers might have an incentive to lie for Biden, especially if they're still active in Democratic politics, but NewsHour said only some remained politically active, while others long ago left to pursue other careers. To be sure, the vast majority are probably sympathetic to Biden's candidacy, but the unanimity of their recollections suggests that Biden was not a habitual predator. If he assaulted Reade, she was almost certainly the only staffer he preyed on in such a fashion. So one thing that comes up a lot when I have seen conversations is that people will say, oh, well, Reade had 4 people who corroborated her story. Her mother, who corroborated some problems in the office, her brother, who changed his story, some unnamed friend, who's also changed their story, and I guess the person that she has recently, she called and reminded that she told about, and then the friend said, oh yeah, I remember that now. What they don't mention is that nobody in Biden's office nobody has a recollection. More people don't recall Tara Reid's, complaining about anything or hearing about anything, then support her. So again, just because you aren't personally the target of someone who is a sexual predator doesn't mean they don't do it. But if there was a pattern of predation, or if there had been discussions about this, like, it just doesn't make sense that nobody would say, oh yeah, that happened. 4, the physical geography does not line up with Reade's claim. Her lawyer describes the scene of the alleged assault as a semi-private area like an alcove between the Russell Building and the Capitol. NewsHour walked the route between these two buildings and found no out-of-view areas like an alcove. There's also somebody on Twitter who looked at, so I think initially she said she went down to the basement because there was a train that was coming in, and in the train that was coming in, she met him, saw him, walked up to him, and then he kind of pushed her to the side and assaulted her there. Then somebody who works in the Capitol building went back to 1993, and they found that in 1993 there was some big statue that had been placed in the middle of the open area where you would normally see someone coming through. So it was actually not possible for her to have done it the way it was described. And also, based on her description of the physical location of the attack, where she would have been attacked would have been like across the way or right next to the Capitol Police Office, which is also in that level. So then the story got changed again to, oh, it was some sort of alcove-y area. Basically, there are no out-of-view areas like an alcove. There are stairwells, which is not so different from an alcove, but that it's impossible. Reade mistook one for it, but NewsHour describes the route as a main thoroughfare, making it at least somewhat unlikely location for a sexual assault. Her fundraiser claim has been refuted by direct contradictory evidence. Staffers said that actually Biden specifically didn't want young staffers to be seen doing menial tasks such as serving drinks. He didn't want the image of a young woman staffer serving him. None of these sources could conclusively state that Reade was never assigned to serve drinks at a Washington fundraiser, but that claim is deeply at odds with the general practices. So, yes, there's a point here about how he didn't really do fundraisers. It was illegal for staff to work at fundraisers. But perhaps most damning is the whole premise of Reade's story is that she complained about, well, first the story was she felt like she was being sexually harassed. She took it to the staff people. The staff people punished her, but Biden didn't necessarily know any of this because he wasn't in touch with his staff. He wasn't managing her staff. And her union story of 2019 was, she said, I don't even know if he knew why I left. He didn't always know our names. Something along those lines. Like basically the fact that she left the office after having complained about how she was being treated inside of it was not something Biden would be aware of, and that's what she was holding him accountable for. But now, then she said there was a sexual assault, but she didn't report it, but she was still fired. Okay, so that was her. The whole thing it was punitive, even though she changed her story. First it was I quit, then it was I resigned, or actually I was forced to resign, and then she changed it to Biden fired me. So again, this is like, which version? It turns out there's a good reason to think none of these versions are true. Turns out Tara Reid was just not good at her job. And in a sort of shockingly not good at her job way, in that other people could do the basics that she just couldn't handle. Like this, some people aren't good at organization or whatever. So anyway, I'll just read this. The most explosive detail in the NewsHour report comes from Ben Savage, a former co-worker who sat next to Reade in the mailroom. Quote, Savage, who worked as the office's systems administrator, overseeing computers and information processing, told NewsHour that Reade was fired for her poor performance on the job, which he witnessed, not as retaliation for her complaints about sexual harassment. According to Savage, Reade had been mishandling a key part of her job and an essential office task, processing constituent mail, something they worked on together. Now, when it comes to like, why would a computers and information processing person be working with someone who is doing constituent mail? I can tell you that because I worked in a Senate office. And the point of you need to track the constituency contacts that you have. So if I remember working for a state senator, and we got letters, and our district was only 150,000 people. We were made up of 3 assembly districts of 50,000 people each. And every week we were sending out letters in response, either email replies. Well, if we got an email reply, I think we still sent out a physical letter if we had a physical address. And then you have to file those. And then you also want to kind of keep a database of contacts of the people who contacted your office. So it makes complete sense. And you're talking about a congressional district. There's probably hundreds of thousands of people in a congressional district. So not only would you have to keep track of their name and address, but, in what part of the place they lived in and other things. So I get completely why you would have somebody with IT working with constituent services. Makes a lot of sense to me. So according to Savage, Reade had been mishandling a key part of her job and an essential office task, processing constituent mail. Sometimes they worked on it together. Savage said he recalls reporting these issues to his boss. She was so bad at her job that he had to report her up the chain of command. He couldn't just work it out between them. He had to kick it up. That's how, that really sucks. You have to be really bad at, sorry, constituent mail is not that difficult. I handled it. I filed it. I've retrieved letters to see what we said to people in the past. Properly, noted it in the database of tracking our responses and things like that. It's not that difficult a job. And if you're going to be taken up the chain of command, that's a serious lack of ability to do your basics. After that, Savage said he began diminishing Reade's duties, taking over some of her tasks, and rerouting the parts of the process to exclude her. So, and that, as from a management point of view, also makes sense. If you can't trust somebody to do the job to the standard it needs to be done, then you're going to end up doing their job for them to make sure it gets done right, because it's faster, even though it's less convenient. It's easier for you to do the things that you can do right, rather than having them be done wrong multiple times by this person. So if you are, then the question becomes, well, if the IT person is taking over and doing Tara Reid's job, and Ben Savage here, he's now doing her job and his job, but he's only getting paid for her job, and she's getting paid for less of what she's supposed to be doing than she's actually doing, then this is unfair on him. It's advantageous to her because she's now not working what she's supposed to earn her paycheck. It's not a tenable situation. So you either up your game or they replace you. The Intelligencer, the Jonathan Chait goes on to write, Savage's recollections calls into question not only Reade's explosive second allegation of sexual assault, but also her first. And it would supply a motive for her to have lied to her friends and her mom in the 1990s. If she was embarrassed for having been fired, she had a reason to concoct a false account of what ended her employment. Her contemporaneous recounting of the assault at the time is the strongest piece of evidence. It is the primary reason to believe Tara Reid's story might be true. But it seems less dispositive, given that another contemporaneous recollection both disputes its specific claim about her reason for firing and supplies a plausible reason why she would have misled her friends about it at the time. And then finally, 7, many people who know Reade do not trust her. And again, this is, I think, an unfortunate thing that happened to Tara Reid when her life was dragged through the public media. This stuff didn't have to come out about her. She didn't have to be made into a national embarrassment. But this is down to Katie Halper, Ryan Grimm, and Nate Robinson. So, Korecki's reporting for Politico does not address the Biden allegations directly, except insofar as it recounts the way Reade discussed Biden over the years, often very positively. The main takeaway is that Reade seems to lie to people frequently. In particular, she preys upon their sympathy to take advantage of their good nature. She has abused the goodwill of landlords and neighbors in this way repeatedly, leaving them to see her as a dishonest person. It is possible that a person with these qualities could have been sexually assaulted. But The pattern certainly has bearing on her credibility. Again, none of this constitutes proof. It is possible more evidence will be found either to strengthen or weaken the basis of her claim, and I agree with that. But the reporting by McGann and NewsHour collectively, I don't know why they left out Politico there, adds a fair amount of weight to the scale. Wherever you stood before, there has to be at least somewhat more doubt now. And ultimately, as I've said before, when you have these he said, she said situations, or he said, or she said, or whatever, your currency is your credibility. And that is why it was, when Dr. Ford came forward, she had sworn affidavits from the people. And the people were basically saying, I'm willing to say that this is what I recall under penalty of perjury. She had done a lie detector test. She turned over her therapy notes without editing any of her documents. And then she testified under oath. She didn't go on Twitter. She didn't give out extra press interviews. She didn't cancel interviews on major media outlets to go sit with Megyn Kelly for a softball interview on YouTube. She didn't do any of that. She basically was like, I didn't want to tell this story publicly with my name attached to it. I sent it to Dianne Feinstein because I wanted her to know about this when making a decision. And Dr. Ford got dragged out into the public, and she did her duty. She gave her testimony. And as much as other people mock her, she is a hero to me. And nobody in this room would mock her. Y'all are cool. But there are awful people out there. And what also annoys me about the Ford situation is there are a lot of people who support Tara Reid who are trying to use Dr. Ford as a shield for Tara Reid's lack of credibility. People are saying, oh, well, you didn't say this with Dr. Ford, and why doesn't Dr. Ford come out and defend Tara Reid? I'm like, when Dr. Ford was being dragged through the press, nobody was asking other Me Too victims to give their opinions or to defend her or come to her aid. Dr. Ford's testimony stood or fell on its own merits. You didn't have to pit women or victims against each other to make her more credible. And the fact that they keep trying to drape Tara Reid's allegations in the cloak of Dr. Ford, to me is a weakness, not a strength. When you ask me why did I believe Dr. Ford and I don't believe Tara Reid, I have an answer to that question. But getting back to the main point. The main point is Tara Reid never should have been dragged through the press like this. Never. Never. I know she wanted this attention. I know she sought out this attention. I know she spent over a year tweeting out her "this is not a sexual misconduct story" version of her Medium post before she changed it in March before giving her Halper interview. I know she was pushing the AP to run with her story, the Washington Post to run with her story, the Vox to run with her story, and they all hesitated. And now we know why. And it's too bad that someone like Laura McGann has to go through and explain why she didn't believe Tara Reid, because none of that had to come out. None of it. And Tara Reid, for having a bad reputation among people she had as landlords and probably job references and whatever else in her past, she is now nationally associated with a lack of credibility. And there are pockets of people who still believe Tara Reid. Fine, go on. I don't there's some people you're never going to change their mind. They picked a position and now they're just going to stick with it for whatever reason. Fine. But increasingly, she looks terrible in the press, in the national media, and her name is becoming kind of a joke because of her lack of credibility. And it's not good for the left. Sorry, I'm going to have to clear my throat. I've got... So, hold on a second. And it's worth here now, me calling out. There are some horrible things being said by people on the left, and y'all need to stop it. Nobody in my fan base, nobody who watches my show would do this kind of crap. But you know what I'm talking about. And I want to... It's not enough to just point out her lack of credibility. They have to characterize her as mentally ill. They have to characterize her as a Putin lover or a Russian agent. And all that does is distract away from what we should be looking at, which is the credibility of both people. And so I don't think I think there are a lot of people on the left who are doing a disservice to the Me Too movement, especially, and it's not just limited to people who are attacking Tara Reid, who are, wait, I lost my train of thought because my friend sent me a message. I noticed it and I got distracted. Where was I going with this? Go back, Christy. Oh yes, it's not only that they're going after sort of Tara Reid in this way, and going after her personally, but they're basically making it more difficult for anyone to come forward, and so they're actually hurting the Me Too movement. And another thing, that like really annoys me again is this sort of appropriation by right-wing people who have no sense of nuance. And they're saying, this is just like the Ford situation with Kavanaugh. And it's simply not. It's just not. When you dig into it, it's so obvious why these are completely different cases. But Tara Reid coming forward like this, and also Halper and Grimm and Robinson elevating her and giving her platforms and credibility without doing their due diligence, they're making it easier for right-wing people to tear down the left and tear down Me Too. So I'm going to wrap up the show. I think we're getting to the end of it. But I honestly think that, there's obviously no sanctions or anything like that that can be done. But drag Katie Halper. She's trash. You're incompetent amateur hour trash. And you are to blame for hurting Me Too. You're not helping anybody. You're hurting the movement. You're hurting victims. You hurt Tara Reid. You didn't do her any favors by putting a spotlight on her life. It was your job, Katie and Ryan and Nathan, to do your jobs to protect her from this kind of stuff. And you failed. All three, you failed. All three, you're trash. And I don't think any of you should be hired anywhere, given any money. And I know in your little pockets of Rose Twitter or wherever else, people are going to hail you as heroes for having the courage to tell a story nobody else told. But a woman's life has been destroyed because of your incompetence. And it just brings to light the difference, why we have journalistic standards. It shines a light on the importance of vetting and background checks and knowing you have the ability to withstand public scrutiny instead of chasing the limelight and the moment and putting your political agenda before a woman's entire reputation and national, being a national mockery or put up for being torn apart on a national stage. You guys put her on that stage. Tara Reid was desperate for that stage for a year, and responsible journalists protected her from herself. And all y'all failed her. Y'all failed her. Y'all trash. Complete trash. And you should feel bad. You should feel bad. You should doubt your professional decision making. Ryan Grimm, who also helped out Dr. Ford, who did not want to be outed. Right? He was going after Dianne Feinstein. He wanted to bring her down. And so in doing so, he broke the story that was meant to be a confidential letter and ended up starting the whole process that dragged Christine Ford out of a confidential communication with her senator into the role that she had to take on, being sort of a face of Me Too. So screw you, Ryan Grimm, you're trash. And Nate Robinson is probably the most disappointing because I actually thought Current Affairs was a good magazine. Apparently, it's not. This guy is willing to use his forum to help push an agenda as well. So all three of you, go have a drink at the trash bar. Because they've got a special VIP section for reporters whose failures ruined people's lives. And you have reserved seats for the rest of your life. Okay, so this, I've gone after Reade a lot, and I've torn down her stories in areas where I thought she lacked credibility because I think that's what Me Too is about. There is the Jussie Smollett case. There are cases where people tell stories because they want attention, you remember, this is really going back, but back when Obama was running, somebody said that they had been attacked by black people and had a bee, like for Barack, cut into their forehead, but they'd cut the bee backwards because they'd actually attacked themselves. And so they wrote it in the Mirror, and they had a reverse B on their head for where they thought their story was that they had been attacked by black people who wanted to vote for Barack Obama. You know, people will come forward with information, and it's up to responsible journalists to vet it. So as much as I wanted, given the time I had spent explaining my hesitation about Reade, I thought it was really incumbent on me as well to hold the people responsible for her public vetting responsible. So that was my show today, peoples. That's it. We're done. So I'm gonna go find a beat to dance to, because right now I'm dancing on my own. Hey, Lonely Wolf, we're just wrapping up. You come in at the end, but you can go back and watch it from the start if you really want to watch some stuff about how to read polls and also journalistic integrity or lack thereof. So what have we been doing? We've been going, oh my gosh, 2:18. All right, that seems like definitely enough time for me. I'm gonna put on some music to dance a bit. Yeah. So I'm trying to think. We got Wednesday D&D coming up. Happy hour not currently scheduled, but probably going to be one in the next day or two. Yeah. And I think that's it. So, and of course, next week, yeah, Weekend Winters coming back up on a Sunday. No idea what I'm going to talk about. I'll just do a TBD on that. But otherwise, yeah, you can hear the music. Otherwise, I'm just dancing. I was like, did I unmute that music? And yes, I did. Yeah, so in the meantime, guys, have a great time till the next time we see each other. And I look forward to seeing you next Sunday. So thank you, people in the chat. Thank you, Flint, again. Mwah. Thank you for the financial support. Appreciate it. Until next time, I've been Christy. You've been awesome. And we'll see you next time. Be well till then. Bye-bye.